Well, hello there. Thank you for joining me. Boy, do I have a good one for you today. Do you realize that there was a time that people were calling those of us, the whiteys, they were calling us white Negroes. And it was all happening around that time that I'm finding very, very suspicious. And you can't beat this logic. Let me read this piece here. The number of white people in the world is very small. Worldwide, there is only about 8 million to 1 billion whites. Actually, that is only about 10% of the world's human population. This is, of course, a great surprise to all Blacks who have been called minorities by these albinos. Blacks, those of Negroid and Caucasoid phenotype, are, of course, the original humans and number over 5 billion of the world's 8 billion people. Albino, I don't know. That's why I always suggest quiet. The idea of albino got into my head. And look at here. The word was coined around 1660 to mean white Negro. This is so funny. I think that they must live in absolute fear of Black people figuring out that these white demons, as I call them, now I'm not calling all of us white demons, but the ones in charge, my new word for them is white demons, okay? So the word was coined around 1660 to mean white Negro by this person named Tellez, a historian and missionary, in order to describe the tribal members he saw along the West African coast. Funny, funny, right? Let's see here. The oldest existing records of albinism, which is the albinos, are found in Germany and Rome. Gee, wonder why that is. It was widely recognized, these people, as the first observers of albinism. So, the discrimination against Africans, which Europeans introduced, the falsification of history, and the pseudosciences that have been practiced for centuries to entrench these belief systems have led to the issue of racialization of Africans by people of European descent. By separating Europe from Africa, Europeans have come to call themselves Caucasians. And before we can understand it, a careful analysis of the origin of the so called Caucasians must be appreciated. It is common knowledge that Africans spread across the world and dominated it. Even today's Europeans or Caucasians are, in fact, Africans who moved north and conquered the snow and the coniferous forests. Genotypically, the Caucasian today, or the white Negro, is not very different from the African. Caucasian gene pool, in fact, represents a tiny fraction of the gene pool of Africans. It's pretty much a conclusion in genetics that the Caucasian or white demons gene pool, albeit trimmed of its original African diversity, still represents a subset of the gene pool of Africans. The question then arises, what has it been trimmed of? So they trim these things off. What is in the African gene that the Caucasians have lost? Are Caucasians albinos from Africa and more? Let us first address the problem with classification. The origin of the labels Caucasian, Negroid, and Mongoloid with 19th century European scientists is seen generally as a precursor for current racial groupings. The groupings are based on nothing but skin color. They equated skin color gradation to a psychological and mental gauge. This person, Blumenbach, named Europeans atop this gauge after the Caucasus Mountains because he thought the smartest and purest Europeans originated there. So yeah, it has been just genetically engineered by all of their, let me get back up here, I scanned too far. Okay, boy, did I scan down there. Okay, yeah, this is really something else. Albinos. Okay. There's only about 10 pages to this file, and I flew past them all. Okay, let me see here. So, then they go into all of this, about 1 in 35 South Africans is a carrier of an albinism mutation. So, yeah, it's new genetic information derived from the Human Genome Project, an international effort to decode the entire human genome, confirmed to the world by scientists that Europeans only appear in the last 65,000 years. So this means a Caucasian is not removed any further from an African by more than the 50th cousin. The origination of the Caucasian. American African folklore hold the belief that tribes with significant carriers of the mutated gene for albinism eventually migrated northward toward Egypt to another area of Africa, which is now called Europe. So folklore is saying that the mutated gene for albinism, which they're calling it albinism, but what they're referring to are Europeans, right? So it allowed them to migrate northward through Europe to another part of Africa. No, excuse me, northward through Egypt to another part of Africa, which is now called Europe, seeking a more hospitable living environment for their offspring. Escape the intensity of the equatorial hot climate of the Great River valleys and Great Lake regions of Central, Eastern, and Southern Africa, which was then and still is south of what is now called Egypt. And remember, when they write these history things, there's going to be some truth in it, but there's going to be a lot of misdirection. So I'll just read what they're saying here, right? I think these people got cooked up in the 1600s, okay? But according to them, the albino group moved up in the mountainous area during the Ice Age or glaciations period that lasted thousands of years, further isolating themselves from their original parent population in Africa. And by being in such isolated living condition for such a prolonged period, they also interbred, thus by creating additional albino offsprings from albino mothers and fathers. So what is this mutation we're talking about? A mutation results in a change of the DNA sequence within a gene or chromosome of an organism, resulting in the creation of a new character or trait not found in the parent type. So anything beyond what your parent type has would be considered a mutation. There is blonde hair, for example, among the Black Australian Aborigines. That is an example of mutation. Albinism is a good example of a mutation. Other examples of mutations are blondism or whiteness among monkeys, apes, and chimpanzees. Europeans do not have the genetic ability to produce the different skin pigments seen through the world. That absence of skin pigment creates the inability to produce colors. I think what they did was they just engineered some gene out, right? It's probably a pretty simple process. As a result, uncolored or white people or white skin is produced. European genes are recessive to the dominant African genes that code for melanin. Recessive genes delineate body characteristics that are masked or not expressed when a contrasting dominant black or trait is present. Black genes create people who have curly hair and whose skin is easily tanned. And that's also interesting because some of us have skin which they would deem more to be olive skin, right? Like I have olive skin. I also have a father who had curly hair. So, yes, olives. There's white people amongst us, and some of us whiteys also have olive skin where I could sit out in the sun for hours, whereas another white person without that trait would be burned to a crisp in the first few minutes. There are many cases of individuals turning white in Hebrew history. When God wanted to show Moses a miracle, he turned his hand white as snow. Then God turned his hand back again to its original color of black. In ancient Hebrew times, when a man had a white spot on his skin, or white or yellow hair, or white skin somewhat reddish, he was pronounced unclean. All people who were victims of this shameful disease were isolated outside of the camp or city and segregated. So here we get to the part that we should be paying extra careful attention to, because remember, King James, the King James Bible is the only Bible that they have monetized. Okay, so let's pay attention to what King James has to say. King James invented discrimination of the divine when he and his team of 47 European interpreters translated the King James Version of the Holy Bible. Purity, virtue, and goodness spew from every pictorial page of white European biblical characters. The Bible reveals a blue-eyed white Jesus hanging on a cross, a golden-haired white Moses showing the tablets of law to the people, and praying at Mount Sinai upon every turn of a page. I am King James, and I proclaim Ham, the youngest son of Noah, to be the father of the black race. On one hand, Ham is a father of the black race because he was cursed and condemned to hell. In Genesis, Ham is the recipient of a curse. The curse is, let Canaan be cursed. That implies that the Canaanites were black. Furthermore, the Berbers were also described as the indigenous Caucasoid people of northern Africa in many scholarly European and American papers, but the Berber language is a Hamitic Semitic language. Does that mean the Berbers were black? The Cushites or Ethiopians and ancient Egyptians also spoke Semitic languages. They predate the Canaanites. And remember, we have canon law under the Roman Catholics. Does that mean they were black before even Canaan was born? More atrocious, the European Church of White Jesus declares that the so-called origination of the black race, they call them the accursed Canaan, and all of his descendants will be damned. Further, these Eurocentric church officials developed a mindset of heathen blacks to devise and formulate deceptive historical attitudes and viewpoints for oppressing and exploiting Africa and the rest of the world. The Aryan nation has come to believe its group does the ongoing work of white Jesus the Christ in regathering his people, calling his people to a state for their nation to ring in his kingdom. The Aryan nation believes that Adam, the man of Genesis, is the placing of the white race upon this earth. Not all races descend from Adam. Adam is the father of the white people only. The Book of Enoch, that's Enoch, which has Hamitic authorship, is considered to be the earliest biblical record of antiquity widely quoted throughout the King James Version of the Bible. The Book of Enoch was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls in the caves of the Qumran. Enoch was Noah's grandfather and Muthales's father. Muthalesses was the oldest man in the Bible, living to be 969 years old. After reading the book of Enoch, it is evident that the entire creation of heaven and earth has not been taught in European and American churches. If this book was written before the book of Genesis and in a Semitic language, aren't we back to black? The King James Version of the Bible sticks with Genesis, however, as the beginning of time. In Genesis 4:15, God orders Cain out of the Garden of Eden. Cain goes out from the presence of the Lord and dwells in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. There he knew his wife and conceived. The land of Nod magically appears without explanation. If Adam and Eve were the first two people on earth who lived in the if Adam and Eve were the first two people on earth who lived in the land of Nod, the word Genesis in Hebrew, so they say in the 18th century, they classified that as part of languages. So we keep getting back to that time frame, no matter how you cook this book, right? Let me see here. Okay, now we're here at the 14th century. In 14th century BC, plagues were endemic throughout the Middle East and Kemet, now called Egypt. The Book of Numbers states that Miriam and Aaron, sister and brother to Moses, revolted against their brother's leadership. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because he had married an Ethiopian woman. They asked if the Lord had indeed spoken only to Moses. Their challenge to Moses angered God. As a punishment, Miriam became leprous, white as snow. While Europeans busied themselves with labeling the entire black race as cursed, a fair-haired English physicist came up with the color spectrum in the mid-17th century, disputing further the claims of the white European Hamitic theory. If Noah and his wife were Caucasoid, it would have been impossible to produce three different races of people. The color theory was proven by Sir Isaac Newton 300 years ago, but the Webster's Dictionary still defines Ham as the father of the black race. Newton's theory presents solid proof that out of black comes all colors. By mixing the three primary colors of red, blue, and yellow together, the color black is produced. Black is the color from which all other colors are produced and is dominant. White, on the other hand, is the color of maximal lightness from which no other colors can be produced and is recessive. Racial engineering. Anthropologists have rushed to reclassify the world's black types. Through Caucasian racial engineering, some brown races have become hypothetically white. It has increased the white race totals with a deceptive apportionment numbering system. The system has been designed to expand and extend white race counts, which only amounts to 8% worldwide, according to the UN Population Division. So this person, a doctor of medicine at Yale, the following is quoted. We propose that the population that survived the last glaciations in southwestern Eurasia was largely a group of albinoids who were better adapted to the ecology than their darker relatives who had previously colonized the area. These latter were gradually replaced by albinoids, though small groups of African Aboriginal types long persisted on the North African seaboard because of the availability of vitamin D-rich saltwater fish. This goodness of fit of the albinoids in this northern environment was due to the more efficient vitamin D production and utilization in the whitened skin in the sunlight deficient latitudes and better cold resistance. New research suggests that people with blonde hair will be completely extinct in 200 years. Blonde hair occurs only in people from Northern Europe. The blonde gene that causes blonde hair color must be on both sides of the family. And according to who you're going to call, there are now too few people who carry it. Some guy led a study and it said that blondes will survive longest in Scandinavia, where they're most concentrated. Globally, Europeans who call themselves white risk genetic elimination. That is why Caucasians are rapidly presenting the world with a conjured up system of the so-called statistical numbers of non-truth as a way to implant new suppositions and beliefs. The non-truth firepower has the ability to deliver psych-up illusionary gunfire amounting to numerical warheads on the target of more Caucasian deceit. The duplicity will end up fabricating a sort of actuality, statistical ballistic weaponry to maximize the dwindling white group numbers. The original Indo-Europeans, referred to as Aryans, were nomads who herded animals in the steppes north of the Black Sea in now what is called Ukraine. Between 5,000 and 6,000 years ago, the Aryans migrated into Europe on horseback and conquered a series of cultures. So they say linguistics link the Iranian language to African languages. Iranian languages include the Arabic language. Arabic belongs to the Semitic languages. Semitic includes Ethiopia and Hebrew people who lived in one of Africa's greatest civilization called the Kemet or Black Nation. So I'll just read their conclusion here. Albinos occur in all race of mankind and in all animal groups. Albinism arises from a distinct hereditary interference with the normal function of melatonin cycles. The enzyme tryptosine is necessary for the formation of melanin and determines the color of the skin, hair, and eyes. Most children born with albinism are born to parents who have normal hair and eye color for their ethnic backgrounds. White skin is a form of albinism. There is no difference genetically or phenotypically speaking between the white skin of a Caucasian person and the person designated as an albino in Africa. One of the most glorious periods of English history was that of the reign of Queen Victoria, 1819 to 1901. The Victorians wore white wigs and powdered their skin to a chalky white, probably in awe of their ancestors. Similarly, the powdered white wig worn by American colonial-era Illuminati reflected the wearer's ability to afford luxury items and identified himself as one of the educated elite. Gee, I wonder if they wore fez hats. In biblical times in Africa and beyond, people with albinism were banished or thrown out and forced to live in colonies, just as people with leprosy or Hansen's disease were forced to live in leper colonies and away from other people. I don't think these people liked us white people. The impression I'm getting is white people, no bueno. Africans believed that God was delivering judgment on a family with albinism and that the individual with albinism is cursed or is the embodiment of sin. During biblical times, albinos were ostracized. The same thing is happening today when albinism occurs in some African societies. Albinos are ostracized by their own families, especially in Black families where the difference in skin color is more distinct. The ostracizing of albinos during biblical times is explanation enough of how Europeans have come to be. African albinos produced more and more albinos until there was an albino group significantly enough to form a new ethnic group or Caucasians. So I rest my case. White people flip the charts. I think if you want to look for a time frame, look around the time that they started enslaving Black people. That would be the point in time that these people took over. So yeah, pretty fancy trick, right? So I was reading along and I kept thinking, why are they calling us Black albinos? And then I figured it out. Well, so the word albino from 1660 means white Negro. I wonder how all these racists in this country would handle this kind of information. I don't think very well. Because remember, Walt Disney, his only interaction with a Black person in his employ was the person who shined his shoes, was the only Black person that Walt Disney employed. I have been saying for years the root of racism comes from these people. And I think within our own white group, we should have two classifications. We have the white demon group, also known as the psychopath, and the rest of us being called white Negroes, right? So we have white demons and white Negroes in our class of people. I don't know why I find it so funny, but here is the thing. Why would they want black people to ever know? And so, how do you keep people from ever knowing? Well, you keep them so oppressed, they can't figure out how to feed their own families. They're living down there in Africa. They got all these church people swarming all around them and stuff. I don't like to classify the tricks these people have pulled on us since they took over, but I gotta say, the trick about white people is something else because white people are the ones who then develop that manifest destiny. I didn't see any black people talking about manifest destiny. White people did all that. They got into that manifest destiny and then as a culture got this idea that, hey, we're the white people. We've invented it all. We found it all and we're going to take it all. So when in reality, the hysterical part is they copied, they cheated, and they murdered to get where they are. And they even tricked the races. Now, that is an even better trick than lying about going to the moon. So I'll be back because I have some interesting things I want to say to you about these cartoons in children's minds. So be safe out there. Goodbye for now.